So welcome all of you to SUP309, AWS Well-Architected Framework for Cloud Security at Scale. Now, if I were to think about several years back, when early stage of cloud adoption, especially speaking with customers, most of our early conversations, it used to be centered around understanding what security controls the cloud came with. Essentially trying to answer, is the cloud secure? However, fast forward to today, the cloud has evolved tremendously, and so has the security tooling. And these days, when I'm speaking with customers, the most frequently asked question, as they have continued to adopt the cloud, is what can we do to remain secure and compliant in the cloud as we continue to scale? So my name is Sarita Dharankar. I'm the security pillar lead with AWS Well-Architected. When I'm not writing best practices, most often I'm working with customers on all things cloud security. And joining me today is my colleague, Neil Sendas. He is a principal TAM with AWS. And we also have Jeff Henderson. He's manager security engineering at Molex. So let's take a quick look at the agenda. For the agenda, we really have two clear takeaways, if I could recommend. The first one is we wanted to share the two AWS mechanisms we have that you all can leverage for learning, for measuring, for baselining, and improving your cloud security posture. The two solutions that we want to talk about is obviously the AWS Well-Architected Framework, which I will be introducing to all of you. And then the second mechanism is the Security Improvement Program. This is a purpose-built program for our enterprise customers. And finally, we also wanted to take this opportunity to share some customer insights from a customer, Molex, which Jeff is going to talk about. It's just understanding from their perspective how they adopted SIP or Security Improvement Program and rest of the AWS mechanisms, and were able to make a positive impact to their security posture. So let's get started. So now, what are the cloud outcomes we typically want? This is from a customer's perspective I'm trying to answer. When I mostly speak to customers, and especially in the context of scaling in the cloud, when we talk about scaling in the cloud, what is that we really mean? I'm talking about customers who are operating several hundreds of AWS accounts across several regions. Possibly they are running geo-distributed teams with geo-distributed data. So that's the kind of scale we are talking about. And when in these kind of scaling, there are normally two kind of use case I often see. There are customers who adopt cloud for all kind of reasons. But these two use cases, the first use case that I often see is customers who are already operating in cloud at large scale, but they're making a very conscious effort to become more cloud native. And the second type of customers, they are rapidly consolidating physical data centers, DC exit programs, and their intention is, as they adopt the cloud, they are aggressively wanting to eliminate tech debt. And with both these scenarios, what is the common denominator we see for success? That is, in both these scenarios, they often have a very strong security foundation. Now, all of you may ask, this is the demystifying part. What is really a good security foundation? And you ask questions from different people and different customers, even in the security field, and you will get different answers. Our aim with AWS Well-Architected is to take away this guesswork and define what a strong security foundation is. Like once you achieve those, you can say, yes, we do have a predictable, measurable security foundation, and that will enable you to scale. Now let's take a look at AWS Well-Architected Framework. What is AWS Well-Architected? A quick poll, how many of you have reviewed AWS Well-Architected, have undertaken some sort of, oh, that's awesome, that's impressive. So some of the information that I'm going to share today, it might feel repetitive to you, but for those who are new to AWS Well-Architected Framework, treat this as a refresher. So AWS Well-Architected Framework, this is essentially a distillation of all of our experiences working with customers of all sizes across all domains. The AWS Well-Architected Framework itself, we have organized into 6 different operational domains. As you all know, or some of you who know, we start with, there is a reliability pillar, there's performance pillar, there is operational excellence, there is security, there is cost optimization, and earlier this year we introduced sustainability. Now, why use this AWS Well-Architected Framework? Now, most often businesses who run their IT systems, how do they know that they have really architected it to a measurable, predictable outcome? The reason we came up with this framework, because we wanted to help you achieve all of these outcomes. That is going to build and deploy faster. And how do you do that? How do you build and deploy faster? One of the mechanisms, or rather one of the best practices, which is consistent across all of the 6 pillars, is we stress heavily on automation. It's like automate, automate, automate. And that enables you to build and deploy faster. There are multiple sections of the AWS Well-Architected Framework where we not only share the implementation guidelines, but there is a lot of code which we share as part of the AWS Well-Architected labs, workshops, and there are a couple of other reference links which I'm going to share. Outside of this, the main takeaway for me why AWS Well-Architected Framework is, this is essentially to help you make or come up with your pros and cons of your design decisions that you make as you build your system in AWS. For the security pillar, let's take a look at the design principles. Now, this really is the core of the security pillar. In fact, all of the operational domains that I talked about, each of the operational domains are centered around design principles. Now, you may ask, how do we even come up with these design principles? Outside of the experiential learning which we get working with customers, a lot of these design principles, we also try to accommodate recommendations from regulatory framework documents. Documentations like NIST, you have National Institute of Standards and Technology, Cybersecurity Framework, or the CIS benchmark guidelines. We distill some of those learnings, and those help also with our compliance-focused customers. And we came up with these design principles. These design principles then turn into security pillars within the framework document itself. We start with infrastructure protection, then we talk about data protection, we talk about detection, incident response, and logging and monitoring. So let's take a look. So what I'll be doing is towards the end of the session, I will be pointing to a lot of AWS Well-Architected artifacts. But as part of this session, I also wanted to take this opportunity to share these top 5 best practices. It's not so much top 5, I should have said like first 5. And the way we kind of came up with this list is, again, working with a lot of large-scale customers, understanding what are those key security design decisions they undertook, which enabled them to scale. Out of this, we'll cover each one in detail. So be it the multi-account strategy, or heading for a least privilege access model, or having a dedicated or a detailed plan for vulnerability management. Once we talk about all of these, the last one that I want to call out, if you see, we say that perform continuous assessment. That really is the central theme of both SIP and AWS Well-Architected Framework. What we are essentially saying that security is never achieved the first time In fact, it is a delta, it is a continuous journey, and building your continuous assessment as part of your security journey is key. Okay. Now, out of these top 5 best practices, the first one is use a multi-account strategy and network segmentation. Now, those of you who are already operating in AWS and you are running multiple accounts, you would clearly know that you would have started out with the first account, and very quickly you would have proliferated into multiple accounts. Now, some of the customers that I worked with, what I realized is retrofitting some of these design decisions, like they might have just a single large AWS account, and they would have done all kind of strategies to segregate their workloads, like production workloads, non-production workloads. They want to do data restriction. All of that is cumbersome to fix it, and it adds effort to your cloud resources. From the get-go, when you start with a multi-account strategy, it helps you, it has multiple benefits. I mean, outside of cost and restricting access, the primary benefit is you really want to manage the impact surface should something go wrong in case of a security incident. The link that I have shared here, which is AWS Security Reference Architecture, this and the GitHub link that I have provided, this link, we have provided a lot of infrastructure as code templates that you can take it, and it is curated based on the designs that we see with the customers. You can take it, use it, tweak it to your need, but they're ready to use. The second good decision you can take for scaling securely in cloud is continuously strive for least privilege access. Now, we are talking about AWS, it is Amazon Web Services, and you would know that the only way to access your assets in AWS is going to be through APIs. And most customers also operate in a multi-vendor environment. They would have multiple vendors, multiple teams, often globally located. So just like you could easily proliferate your AWS accounts, it's very easy to proliferate IAM roles. It's super easy, especially when you have one-click option. You have managed policies. You have infrastructure as code templates which are reusable. So unless you are very intentional about managing your IAM roles and IAM credentials, they can totally proliferate. And I've seen with many customers, when they are assessing the usage or the pool of these IAM resources, many a times you would find there are roles which hasn't been used since a long time. So some of these best practices is to help you maintain that strong access posture. So number one, definitely consider minimizing or in fact eliminating static credentials. And outside of this, the one service that I want to call out, it's the identity or IAM access analyzer. Those of you who have used the service, it can help with two things. IAM access analyzer, it helps you detect all of your resources that is shared with an external entity, be it your S3 buckets or your IAM roles themselves. The second thing it can really help you is IAM access analyzer, it can help you build scope down IAM policies based on least privilege access model, based on your CloudTrail logs. And there are multiple examples, again, within the AWS Well-Architected Lab, and I totally urge all of you to take a look at it. At number 3, we have perform vulnerability management. The 2022 cybersecurity trend report from Gartner, it had an interesting stat. It says that by 2025, which is not really far, about 45% of the worldwide organizations, global organizations, they would experience some form of security issue. And this is a 3-fold increase from the 2021 stat. And what is interesting about that stat is all of it points to unmanaged vulnerabilities. Outside, obviously, the targeted ransomware attacks, a big percentage is dedicated to unmanaged exploits. So getting vulnerability management is absolutely critical when you're thinking about scaling and remaining secure and compliant. There are a couple of key services I would like to highlight here. The first one is Amazon Inspector, by far one of my most favorite security tools within the AWS security and compliance family. The tool, it not only helps you identify vulnerabilities, it allows you to perform your benchmarking security benchmark checks against CIS, foundational checks or advanced checks. And just this week, there was a new feature announced with Amazon Inspector. It also now supports serverless compute, like containers and Lambda functions. For your container scanning, I want to call out Amazon ECR image scanning. And I also want to highlight an open source project tool. It's called the Claire project. How many of you have used the Claire project? So it's an open source API-driven analysis engine. It's a great tool. It performs a layer-by-layer security on your entire container, and it provides the most recent, or it gives you almost CVE kind of a matching for vulnerabilities in your containers. Okay. Then use a solution like Patch Manager from AWS Systems Manager. AWS Systems Manager, Patch Manager, it allows you to build granular patch plans, even to very small subset of systems, and you can completely automate this process. An example of an automated patch solution is available both as code, and it is available in the console steps within the AWS Well-Architected Lab. Next we have is develop and exercise an incident response plan. Now, before you work on this people, process, technology triad to build your incident response plan, the one thing, the most value that you would get out of this exercise is if you could consider you keeping automation in the center. Especially when you're talking about scaling in the cloud, you do want to automate most of the common use cases or easily remediated solutions. The way it's going to help you is you are going to be helping your limited cloud resources to be doing high-value work or innovating rather than responding to items which are easily remediated. In fact, most of the malware auto-response or malware remediation is very easily remediated. And all of those examples are not only available in the AWS Well-Architected Lab, but do check out other security tooling from AWS, that is GuardDuty and Amazon Inspector. Okay. At number 5, we have protect data at rest and in motion. As our CTO, Dr. Werner Vogels, likes to say, he likes to quote this a lot. He often says that, dance like no one is watching, but encrypt like everyone is. So encryption remains a key strategy for protecting your data. Now, when you're protecting your data at rest, you may have some exceptions where you might not want to encrypt. But when you're talking about encrypting data in motion, there's absolutely no exception. Encrypt everything when your data is moving. Now, a big challenge, which I often see, again, with customers when they build this encryption strategy, is around key management. Again, here is a quick question. How many of you have a well-tested key management strategy? That's awesome. So the challenge with key management is, do you want to manage the keys? Do you want to manage the data? Or do you want to do both, but you want to still have effort available to do some of your innovations? So here, I'm biased to AWS KMS service, just because I work a lot with it. But here, the recommendation is, if you can offload, if you can use a managed services to help you with your key management, go for it. Okay. Now, all these best practices are great. Most of the times, it's not only our customers, but I often see, even working with our field community teams, is how does one go about implementing these best practices? So there are a couple of ways we try to achieve this within the AWS Well-Architected Framework. And one of the ways we try to do is we try to curate exhaustive set of labs where you can use available code And the second mechanism we try to do is we try to build prescriptive implementation guidance. So for example, when you do a well-architected framework review of your workload, you might come up with many of the findings, what we call as the high-risk issues or the medium-risk issues. Now, with all those issues, knowing those issues is great because we're making the data visible to you. But how do you fix them? When it is about fixing or resolving those issues, that's where we point you to these resources. So here is a quick example of a typical lab. This is an up-and-coming lab, which we are trying to add it to our data protection section. And this lab, the template, this is purpose-built for detecting and sending notification for sensitive data that is detected in Amazon S3 buckets. Now, the cool thing about Amazon Macie is it not only provides default data patterns, but you can define your own custom data. These custom data, which is relevant to your organization and you treat it as sensitive, Amazon Macie will detect. And this solution is, again, both the console steps and the code is going to be made available. But like this lab, there is a whole set of other labs which spans across all of the 5 pillars. Towards the end of the session, I'm going to share all of the useful links of the AWS Well-Architected Framework and also of SIP. Now, before I hand over and I invite my colleague, I want to give a quick intro to the SIP program. Now, the Security Improvement Program and AWS Well-Architected, how are they tied together? Now, the Security Improvement Program uses all of the AWS Well-Architected Framework and concepts and design principles, and it was turned into an enterprise support offering for our customers who have enterprise support. And the main reason for doing that is, again, I'll take a quick poll. How many of you really have a lot of time to kind of, tweak your design, fix your design, do HRI issues outside of your work? We are all busy. And that's the reason we thought, how about we engage our AWS support team who can act like that extended team and help you resolve those HRIs and improve your security posture. With that, I'd like to now invite my colleague Neil, and he'll walk you all through the Security Improvement Program, and he's going to walk you through the process and the offering itself.
Thanks, Sarita. Good afternoon, everyone. Neil Sanders, Principal Technical Account Manager at AWS. So you heard Sarita talk about the benefits of well-architected framework. It helps you design, implement, and maintain a secure cloud infrastructure. But what we often hear from our largest enterprise customers, they reach out to our account teams, particularly TAMs, is I would love to implement a well-architected framework for my environment. However, my environment is very complicated. It has thousands of AWS accounts. I have legacy accounts with application codes that's been there for ages. I have applications that are born in the cloud, modernized applications that are serverless, and then I also have third-party applications that I self-manage and self-host. So pretty much my environment, the security maturity of my environment varies. So can you help me build a prescriptive recommendation for my environment that is, it helps, it caters to the needs of my environment, right? So more importantly, I want to build a continuous improvement process around my security posture. I don't want to review it just once, but make sure that I have a process to measure, monitor, and then continuously improve my baseline. So that's where Security Improvement Program comes in. So Security Improvement Program, it's a TAM-led engagement for enterprise customers under NDA only at this time. What it does is it measures the maturity of your security environment against 250 plus industry best practices. And then what you get out of that is a maturity score that covers the focus areas that I'm going to talk about pretty soon. And it also helps you get a proactive recommendation and a set of action plans based on the risks and gaps that are identified. So there are about 4 stages of this program, and let's get into the details of that a little bit. The first stage is the baseline stage. In the baseline stage, the TAMs, the Security Improvement Program SMEs, your customers, SAs, and their security leads, they have a discovery session, right, where we go over those 250 plus questionnaires and try to identify those gaps in our environment. And the focus areas are around incident management, your IAM policies, data protection, detection and logging capabilities. So once you're done, it takes about 3 to 4 sessions to go over the entire set of questionnaires. And what it generates out of this is an automated security maturity score that we take it to the next stage, where the TAMs and the SMEs take those reports and those maturity scores to come up with a mitigation plan to address those gaps that were identified in the previous stage. But this is the stage where we go offline and work on our own and come up with these recommendations. We bring in our specialists if we need to. And finally, we meet again. That's the prioritization stage. This is where these recommendations, the mitigation plans are shared with the customers. And then we work on based on your priorities. And there could be an area which is more important for you. We build an action plan around that. And finally, once the action plan is built, that's when the continuous improvement stage begins. That's the ongoing mitigation stage. So we'll generally set up cadence calls, about bi-weekly cadence calls to answer some of these questions and work with your teams. We also help enable by setting up trainings, game days, overall help you improve your overall readiness of your organization to handle security events. So that's the overview of the Security Improvement Program. Now, another question we generally get from the customers is that my security teams are busy. They often have a backlog of items that they need to address. What is the time commitment am I looking at when I engage in this program? So I wanted to go over the life cycle of the program with time commitment in each of these stages. So the first stage is the prepare stage, which is the introductory call that we have with your teams, get to know the teams, talk about the deliverables, what to expect, and then we start the baselining phase, which, as I mentioned, 3 to 4 sessions, takes about 4 to 6 hours of time to go through this entire set of questionnaires. Now, this is the most important stage because that's where we baseline your current standards, and then the success of this stage also depends on availability of the team to be around to answer these questions. And of course, we don't have to have this done in one sitting. It could be broken down into multiple days. And then the strategy phase, where we come up with a mitigation plan. That's, again, offline, so we do it on our own. Takes us about 2 to 4 weeks to get back to you with a response and the plan. In the prioritize phase is where we come up with our action plan, which takes about 30 to 45 minutes to share our reports with you. And the next 3 bullet points are about the continuous improvement stage. So the implementation, improvement, and then measurement stage. So that depends on how many gaps were identified and the areas that you want to prioritize, short-term, long-term. What we have typically seen is a bi-weekly call for about 4 to 6 months is good enough to cover the entire spectrum. So that's the SIP program for you. I also want to cover a little bit on what is the focus of SIP and what is not the focus of SIP. So Sarita mentioned the different focus areas a little bit, but I want to get a little bit deeper on that. So security improvement program is based on the well-architected framework. It's built on the security pillar of the well-architected framework. The focus areas are identity and access management, detection, auditing, infrastructure protection, data protection, incident response. So in the identity and access management focus area, we look into your control access, your multi-account strategies, your key management policies. On the detection logging, we look at your visibility. Do you have enough logging? Do you have enough auditing in place? For infrastructure protection, is your infrastructure protected? Do you have threat detection in place? Data protection looks at, is your data secure? Do you have encryption in place? Do you have EBS volumes encrypted? Do you have your RDS snapshots encrypted? And finally, the incident response stage is, the focus area on that is to look at your observability. And do you have monitors and measurements in place to react to these events? Do you have a run book in place? Do you have a escalation plan in place? Do you know the escalation point of contact? So that's just a quick peek of the areas we focus on. Again, there's like 250 plus questionnaires that this thing is based on. What it is not, however, is it's not a security audit of our environment. We're not performing any kind of compliance audit to make sure that you are compliant, or then it's also not a service-specific deep dive. We're not looking at, let's say, IAM policies and diving deep into your IAM configurations to say whether you're provisioned properly or not. In fact, it is completely service agnostic. You could even have third-party services managing these. Those recommendations are still valid. They're based on best practices, industry best practices, and it is not an effort to increase service utilization of any AWS services at all. It's completely service agnostic. Finally, it's not a one-time effort. It's more of a process improvement effort to help you improve and make sure your security posture improves over time. So what do you get out of these? So what are the deliverables? So you get a maturity and security score. You get a weighted average of all the different critical items that are identified and the pillars that are the areas I talked about. You also get a security score for each of these pillars and assess where you stand against the industry standards. And then you can dive deep into each of these pillars based on those pillars that are, these responses are either critical all the way up to low. What is your score, overall maturity, and then overall ratings of this, of your environment. And finally, we have action plans for all of these findings. For all these critical findings, in fact, for all the lowest findings as well, there are documentations, there are artifacts, scripts that you could take advantage of to make sure that you improve your score over a period of time. So that's security improvement program for you. Now, I'd like to invite Jeff from Molex to talk about how Molex implemented security improvement program and how they benefited from this program. Jeff?
Thank you, Neil. Hello, everybody. I'm Jeff Henderson. I'm from Molex. We're a global electronic solution company. Let's see here. Yeah, we've $7 billion in revenue, 42,000 employees, 100,000 products. We've been in business for about 80 years. We are a consumer of AWS services, and we also are a supplier with AWS with data networking products to support their cloud and hyperscale applications, and we're a subsidiary of Koch Industries. I'm here to explain my experience with the security improvement program, the value that I've already seen, the value we expect to get, and our experience with the program up to now. So why did we use a security improvement program? We had a few security incidents in some of our accounts, and we wanted to make sure we were following best practices and being able to respond when they did happen. So we started with wanting to focus on a group of accounts, we decided to use our developer accounts. These accounts don't have a connection back to the corporate network. They have less guardrails so the developers can innovate quicker. So we needed to know where to focus. We needed help taking the 5 pillars and putting them into action. We needed some metrics for management. And we looked to our AWS team for guidance. And they suggested we use the Security Improvement Program. So where to focus? We originally wanted to focus on a single account, but that's not how this works. We focused on all of our developer managed accounts. We call them NG for next generation, so you might hear me say that. The Amazon team scheduled calls with us. They were about, as Neil said, about 4 calls. They lasted between 1 and 2 hours each. Calls were interesting because as we went through the questionnaires, we were able to discuss some of the areas and learn while we were doing that. The AWS team did a great job in getting these calls scheduled and done. I remember during the process there were some vacations, but it didn't take too long to get all the calls scheduled, so didn't feel like it was a waste of time. So after, I think it only took about 2 weeks for us to get the output. We received a detailed report that showed our answers and recommendations in a spreadsheet. We also received a PowerPoint presentation that listed all the criticals. So that was very helpful because that's where we decided to focus. Oops, let me pushing the wrong button here. There we go. So how did the Security Improvement Program help us? Our parent company sets up a lot of our AWS accounts, establishes the guardrails, and supports us with incident response. The Security Improvement Program gave us the opportunity to work with that team to understand better what was in place. We were able to use the output that we received for management. I actually took, a few slides ago, you saw the output. I took one of those slides and put it right into our presentation to management. And so it helped us focus on what we needed to do. And then it gave us an opportunity to leverage our AWS account team and work with some talented security pros. Our approach to using the results. So upon receiving the report, we focused on the critical items. I don't know how many people in here focus on the mediums first, so that's a no-brainer. The workflow, so we use a Kanban for our security team, and we created a story for each of the pillars, and then the findings, we put a task in for each one of them. We're focusing on some of the low-hanging fruit first that could easily be fixed. And then some of them we found out they weren't actually an issue once we had some more conversations, so that was helpful. And some of the issues that were given to us were going to be taken care of in some of the security initiatives we're working on. So that was helpful for some ammunition. And then a critical step in this whole process is the follow-up, scheduling the follow-up calls to go over your progress and getting advice on what to do to fix this stuff. And so I'm going to go into each of the pillars and discuss a little bit about each one so you'll have an idea of what the improvement program, the security improvement program gives you. So IAM. One of the questions was, have you set up a security challenge question for each of your accounts? Now, this is not one of those that I thought of to begin with. Question for the group here, how many people have set up that security challenge question? Let's see, I see 2 hands. Okay, so I don't feel so bad. It's not something that, I don't feel so bad that I didn't set that up. So, is there value in doing this? I think there is. I think it's something that'll, help if somebody were to get into your account and try to make changes that they shouldn't. So, a lot of this section focused a lot on improvements that our secrets management and CIEM initiatives are going to address. Detection. So have you updated the right contact details for security incidents under alternate contacts in AWS account settings. I'm guessing the two people that raised their hands for setting up the challenge questions also did that, right? Okay, good. So, and some of the other items in this section focused on log file protection. We were able to address 100% of the critical items in this section. Okay. Infrastructure protection. So this section included WAFs, security groups, MFA, and critical servers. One of the section's questions was, is your CDN/CloudFront configured to return default root object to avoid exposing the contents of your web distributions? So it's a mouthful there. And so we didn't know that. So because we didn't know that, we worked with our firewall team and had a discussion and found out that they actually did set that up. So again, back to having those conversations, this is really helpful. So this section, we're able to actually make a 50% improvement. Data protection. So this is a little more difficult in the group of accounts that we were focusing on because we have less guardrails. We allow them to innovate. And so encryption and data classification is something that was lacking. This report allowed us to have that conversation, or another reason to have that conversation with these account owners and emphasize the need for encryption and data classification. Another area we spotted, or we missed, was RDS snapshots. We didn't scrutinize those like we do with EBS, so that was another finding, an eye-opener for us. So we reduced our critical findings in this area by 20%. This is going to take longer with data encryption, classification. If anybody has a surefire way to get everybody to classify all their data, can you tell me? So, and then incident response. So we improved this section by 33%. One of the improvements centered around, have you implemented detection and auto-remediation of common security incidents by doing retrospective analysis with existing tools or in-house tools? So while we were putting this presentation together, we actually had a Guardie found an incident for us, and that prompted a review that allowed us to put in some automation that'll hopefully prevent that in the future. So yeah, this section we improved by 33%. So going forward, so continuing to use the security improvement program. We don't see this as a one-time event. We plan to continue to have the review the calls and track our performance. Setting up those calls is critical. My account team actually reminded me about that, so very helpful. We want to expand the scope of this review. As I said, we focus on a group of accounts. We really need to expand that scope to all of our accounts. And then we plan on including more teams in the future when we have these reviews to have the discussions. And then I'm going to hand it back to Sarita for a call to action.
So thank you, Jeff, for your insights and your time. Now, call to action. I want to do a quick recap of AWS Well-Architected Framework and SIP. What AWS Well-Architected is, it's a framework document. So you get a framework document, you get a white paper, pillar-specific white paper. There is a self-service tool available within the AWS console. The service itself is region-specific. So if you don't see AWS Well-Architected tool in your region, select US East 1. As I mentioned, the AWS Well-Architected tool, it's meant for you to learn, discover, baseline, and measure your security posture. Or, in fact, whichever pillar you are reviewing, it's meant to be making that data visible to you so that you can do pros and cons of some of the design choices that you have made. I request you today take a picture of this slide. So if you see the main link of the well-architected artifact is shared, there is the tool, then there is labs where we house a lot of curated patterns across all of the 6 pillars. And then there is a link also to the AWS Solutions Library, where you can see prescriptive solutions and guidelines across all AWS services. Now, when should you use AWS Well-Architected Framework versus SIP? AWS Well-Architected, the framework itself, either you can self-serve, like you can create a workload and go through all of the questions, feed in your answers, and you will get a lot of insight out of it. But you can also reach out to your account team, and the account SA can help you guide a review of your workload. The SIP, as I mentioned, this is a productized version for our enterprise customers. So if you are an enterprise customer and you want to get started on SIP, just reach out to your TAM or reach out to your account team, and they'll be more than happy to help. One final resource that I want to share is I've provided a link to the Assessment Solutions Library, which is hosted in our GitHub repo. A lot of this solution is actually curated from Prowler and Scout Suite. Both of these are open source projects. And this has a lot of modules that we have included which helps with ransomware remediation, just building a proactive posture for ransomware response. And finally, the AWS Well-Architected booth is, we have a dedicated booth in the Venetian in the Expo Hall. So if there is anything specific you would like to understand within the security pillar, or if you would like to do a deep dive on any of the other pillars, just come and find one of us. We'll be there. Outside of that, we are going to be available here for some time. We have some time to take a couple of questions. And other than that, thank you so much for your time. It's Wednesday evening, and we totally appreciate that you all showed up here and not at the happy hour. Thank you very much. And one last request, please take the survey and let me know what else we can do with AWS Well-Architected Framework. I do read those comments, I do take all of those feedbacks, and we always endeavor to make those improvements. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your reInvent.